It started like any quiet night at the lake cabin, crickets humming, the water gently lapping at the dock, the last embers of our campfire dying out. My brother and I had come up for a weekend away, hoping to escape the noise of Washington and the tension of politics. The cabin, owned by our family since the early 80s, had always been a place of peace, laughter, and long summer memories. We thought the worst thing we'd face would be the mosquitoes or maybe the old plumbing. We never imagined a gun would be pointed at either of us. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, had never been a problem until the new president took over 6 months ago. She ran her election like a hostile corporate takeover, sweeping in with promises of order, cleanliness, and enforcement. At first it seemed harmless reminders to trim hedges and repaint mailboxes, but then came the fines, and the tone changed from helpful to hostile. People who didn't fall in line were suddenly in violation of obscure rules no one had ever heard of. We were targeted almost immediately. Our dock, grandfathered in from the 1980s, was declared non with updated regulations that had never been voted on. They sent letters, then threats of daily fines. My parents refused to tear down something they'd built with their own hands, something that had stood for decades without issue. Then came the unannounced inspections, HOA board members showing up with clipboards and cameras, walking our property like they owned it. I started to document everything: photos of their visits, voice memos when they knocked uninvited, even the letters. My brother, a sitting U.S. senator, said it was a classic power play. They're testing boundaries, he warned. Still, neither of us believed it would go further than fines and harassment. After all, this was just a lake community, not Capitol Hill. We didn't think we needed to worry about our safety that night. We had grilled burgers, opened a bottle of red, and sat on the porch. The stars shimmered in the black sky, and for the first time in months my brother looked relaxed. No phone calls, no policy briefings, just the siblings reconnecting. It was close to midnight when we heard the knock. 3 hard, deliberate bangs. Not the kind a neighbor would use, the kind that made your stomach sink. My brother stood first, narrowing his eyes toward the door. "Expecting someone?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I shook my head slowly, heart beginning to race. We hadn't seen another soul since early afternoon. There were no cars in the gravel drive, no footsteps on the porch before the knock. Everything about it felt wrong. Too quiet, too precise. We both stepped to the window cautiously, peering out from behind the curtain. A man stood at the door, tall, broad, and dressed in dark tactical gear. The letters HOA Enforcement were stitched across his vest in blocky white font. He had what looked like a badge clipped to his belt and one hand resting on a holstered gun. My brother's face went cold. "That's not a real cop," he said. The man knocked again, louder this time. "Open the door." "HOA Enforcement," he said through the wood. "You're in violation of Property Code Section 4.7. Immediate compliance is required." It didn't sound official, it sounded theatrical, like someone imitating authority. My brother motioned for me to step back. "Get your phone, record everything." "Do not open that door," he said. I grabbed my phone and started recording. My brother turned on the porch light from inside, flooding the doorway with a harsh yellow glow. The man flinched slightly, squinting, then shifted his hand to rest firmly on his gun. "Sir, this is private property," my brother called out. "You are trespassing. Identify yourself now." The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer to the door. Everything after that happened fast. The man reached for the doorknob, tried to twist it. It was locked. He backed up a step, drew his gun, and aimed it at the window beside the door. "I'm authorized to enforce compliance," he said. My breath caught. My brother didn't move. "That's not how this works," he replied calmly, his voice steely. We ducked low, pulling away from the line of fire. My brother pulled his wallet from his jeans and held up his Senate ID through the window, bold and deliberate. "I'm Senator Marcus Hale. You are impersonating law enforcement. Drop the weapon now." The man froze. For a second, the whole world paused. Even the crickets seemed to fall silent. The fake cop's face contorted in surprise. He hadn't expected resistance, let alone a U.S. senator. He lowered his gun slightly, uncertain. Then we heard tires on gravel, headlights. A real patrol car, summoned by the emergency alert we triggered minutes earlier. The man bolted before they could see him, disappearing into the woods. The officers found him hiding behind a neighbor's shed, trying to change out of his vest. He carried no real badge, no certifications, just a laminated card made on a home printer and a Glock with a serial number scratched off. He was arrested on the spot. The police questioned us for hours, combing through our security footage and recordings. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. He wasn't acting alone. Under pressure, the man revealed he'd been paid in cash by someone in the HOA, no names, just a burner phone and a printed photo of our dock. His instructions were simple: scare them into compliance, use force if needed. That phrase would later be repeated in court, echoing in every headline and news segment. Within 48 hours, the story exploded. A sitting senator nearly shot at his own property by a fake cop hired by an HOA. News vans lined the road to our cabin, satellite dishes aimed at the treetops. Reporters waded through the shallows of the lake to get a better angle. It felt surreal, our sanctuary turned crime scene, the world watching. My brother was furious but focused. He'd faced threats before, lobbyists, extremist mail, even a stalker once, but this was different. This was someone trying to enforce authority where none existed, emboldened by a community board gone rogue. The potential for abuse was massive, and we had the proof to expose it. The fallout began immediately. The HOA board tried to distance themselves, releasing a statement condemning all forms of vigilante enforcement, but it was too late. Neighbors came forward with stories of their own harassment, stalking, unexplained fees. A whistleblower from inside the HOA provided emails, meeting notes, even recordings. The corruption ran deep. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind, the glint of the gun, the creak of the doorknob, the moment everything could have ended. My brother told me not to dwell on it, but it stayed with me, a heavy echo in my chest. We could have died that night. Over a dock, over a petty vendetta wrapped in HOA policy. It didn't feel real. Lawmakers reacted swiftly. Within a week, my brother stood on the Senate floor, introducing a bill that would mandate federal oversight for armed security employed by private associations. It was unprecedented, and it had bipartisan support. No one wanted to imagine their own HOA turning into a private militia. As the investigation unfolded, the HOA president was placed under arrest. Her house was searched, revealing dozens of classified board documents and cash withdrawals that matched the fake cop's testimony. The board was disbanded. The lake community put under state supervision. For the first time in months, people breathed easier, but the scars didn't fade quickly. Families who had lived in fear now stepped into the sunlight again, cautiously. Hopeful signs reading HOF rezone appeared in windows. Our dock, battered but standing, became a symbol. People took selfies on it, posted them with captions like "Stand your ground, Lakeview." We stayed at the cabin for another week after it all broke. Journalists kept calling. Documentary crews reached out. One night a group of neighbors brought over pie and coffee, just to say thank you. "You took the hit we were all afraid to," one said. My brother nodded solemnly. "No one should have to," he replied. What happened at that cabin was more than a local scandal. It revealed something dangerous beneath the surface. How easily power can be abused, how quickly it can escalate when left unchecked. My brother always said politics is about pressure and systems, but this was personal. This was home, and we almost lost it. That knock at the door shattered something in us, but it also revealed what we needed to fight for. Not just policy, not just reform, but safety, dignity, and the right to be left alone. The senator went back to DC with more than just another cause. He went back with a mission, and I stayed behind to rebuild what they tried to break. The lake still glows in the moonlight, and the dock still creaks under bare feet. But now there's a camera mounted discreetly above the porch, and a motion light that kicks on at the slightest movement. We don't take chances anymore. We learned the hard way what pretending to be a cop can do and what real justice looks like when it finally arrives. The quiet didn't last long after the arrest. Whispers moved through the lake community like ripples on the water at first, then breaking into open waves. Some neighbors were relieved, others terrified. A few defended the HOA president, saying she had good intentions but took it too far. The divisions cut deeper than we expected. Even as legal proceedings began, the neighborhood felt fractured. The town hall meeting held 2 weeks later turned into a shouting match, accusations, tears, people storming out. A man I'd known since childhood called my brother a liar, claiming the whole thing was political theater. He staged it, the man barked, for headlines. My brother didn't attend the meeting. He said it was better I represent the family, since we were the full-time residents. I walked into that hall with my shoulders tight and heart pounding. The room buzzed with energy, half hostility, half curiosity. Everyone wanted answers, but few wanted to listen. They came to vent, not to hear truth. I brought evidence, video stills, excerpts from police reports, screenshots of texts between board members. I laid them out calmly, methodically. Some people listened, others scoffed. A woman in the back yelled that the senator had brought trouble to the lake. Another said we were just city people trying to control country rules. But something shifted when I played the audio of the fake cop, gun drawn, demanding compliance. The room fell silent, even the loudest critics stunned. One man muttered a curse under his breath. For a moment, the air felt heavier. It wasn't a story anymore. It was real. The fear in my voice, the sharpness in my brother's tone, it changed. Everything. After that, the temperature shifted. Not all at once, but gradually, like ice breaking on a thawing lake. Some neighbors who had avoided us started waving again. One left a note on our porch, "Thank you for standing up." Another brought over zucchini bread and stayed to talk for an hour. But not everyone was ready to move on. A group of residents, some former HOA loyalists, formed a concerned neighbors council. They claimed the arrest had been an overreach and the senator's presence had invited federal surveillance. They circulated flyers filled with conspiracies, CIA drones over Lakeview, forged IDs, false flag operations. It would have been laughable if it hadn't worked on some. The The sheriff's office increased patrols, especially after someone spray-painted liars across our front fence. I scrubbed it off myself, hands shaking from anger. The old sense of peace at the cabin had turned into a constant awareness of eyes, of tension. What once felt like sanctuary now felt like a stage surrounded by shadows. My brother stayed in D.C., busy pushing his new legislation through committee. We spoke every night, updating each other. He was calm but concerned. They're looking for a narrative that absolves them, he told me. And when people are scared, they believe anything that makes them feel like victims. He wasn't wrong. One morning I found a small envelope tucked beneath our doormat. Inside was a grainy photo of me walking alone by the dock, taken from the trees. No note, no signature, just the image. My heart thundered as I scanned the tree line. The threat wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet, subtle, and meant to unsettle. The sheriff took it seriously, but there was little to trace. We upgraded our cameras, replaced locks, added motion sensors. Friends from town came to stay with me in shifts. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but I was. Not of another fake cop, but of the hatred still simmering just below the surface. Meanwhile, the trial for the imposter was scheduled to begin in 2 months. Pre-trial hearings revealed even more disturbing details. The man had been trained in military-style tactics, had a history of assault, and had once applied to be a deputy but was rejected for instability. And yet someone still hired him. The president's lawyer argued she had no knowledge of his background, that it was an isolated incident. But documents told a different story: bank withdrawals, burner phone purchases, and a list titled Compliance Plan Phase 2. Our cabin address was circled in red ink. It was premeditated, and it was personal. Reporters returned as more came to light. One crew followed me to the post office, shouting questions about my brother's plans for re-election. Another tried to interview our neighbors. Some people complied, others slammed doors. We were all tired of being pawns, tired of the circus, tired of feeling watched. Still, something in me hardened. Fear gave way to determination. I began compiling my own case video logs, photos, written timelines, not for a lawsuit, but for documentation. I wanted the truth preserved, unfiltered. Not just the sensational version the media wanted, but the real human story: betrayal, courage, and aftermath. The senator's bill passed out of committee by a narrow margin. He called me voice hoarse from back-to-back meetings. "It's moving," he said. "They're listening." I asked if he felt vindicated. "No," he replied. "I'll feel vindicated when no one else has to go through what we did." That stuck with me. By late summer, the lake returned to a fragile calm. Kids swam again, barbecues resumed. Laughter echoed across the water, but it felt different, more cautious, like we were all pretending. Beneath the surface, a collective trauma hung in the air. We'd survived something, and not all of us had processed it yet. A neighbor hosted a bonfire, inviting everyone. I almost didn't go, unsure if I could handle small talk and forced smiles. But I went. People were kind. They asked questions. Some apologized. Others just sat beside me in silence. Healing, I realized, didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just meant showing up. Later that night, I stood by the shore, staring out at the black water. The reflection of flames flickered across the ripples. I thought about everything we'd lost and everything we hadn't. The dock still stood. My brother was safe. We had faced something unthinkable and was still standing. That mattered. The trial began on a humid Tuesday morning. The courthouse packed with reporters, legal observers, and more than a few angry residents. The accused sat stone-faced, dressed in a gray suit that couldn't hide his discomfort. His lawyer made him look composed, but I could see the tension in his eyes. He wasn't used to bright lights or this much attention. The man who came to our cabin as a ghost now faced a full glare of public judgment. Security was heavy. Metal detectors, armed marshals, bag checks, a new reality we were all getting used to. The judge entered with a stern nod, aware this case wasn't just about impersonation. It was about trust, power, and the danger of unchecked authority. I sat in the second row, palms sweaty, heart thudding. Beside me, a retired neighbor whispered, "About time." The prosecution opened strong photos, audio recordings, surveillance footage, a timeline that painted a chilling picture. A man, paid in cash to impersonate law enforcement and threaten citizens under the guise of HOA authority. Each exhibit was a nail in the coffin. The jury watched, scribbled notes, exchanged glances. The truth was undeniable, but the defense wasn't going down without a fight. They called it misguided intent, said he was misled by HOA leadership and believed he had legal clearance to enforce rules. They painted him as a tool, a scapegoat, even a man who made mistakes but never intended to harm. The defense leaned into doubt, into blurred lines between private enforcement and actual policing. It was clever and dangerous. The HOA president refused to testify, invoking her Fifth Amendment rights. Her absence loomed large, a silent admission that echoed through the courtroom. Former board members gave conflicting stories, some suddenly claiming ignorance. But the receipts told another story. Payments, notes, encrypted group chats labeled "Action Team." There was no mistaking intent, As I listened, I kept thinking about the knock, that sound, the authority in it, the cold threat. It came back every time they replayed the audio. I flinched more than once. A reporter caught it and included it in their article. Victim relives trauma in court. The headline read, "But I wasn't there for headlines. I was there for the truth." My brother arrived on the third day of the trial. Slipping into the courtroom with 2 aides and a guarded look, he nodded to me, then focused forward. When he took the stand, the room quieted completely. He spoke calmly, clearly, his voice measured but resolute. "This was not a misunderstanding," he said. "This was domestic intimidation." He laid out the events, corroborated the audio, referenced legislation in progress. But what struck everyone most was when he paused, looked at the jury, and said, "If this can happen to a U.S. senator, imagine what's happening to people with no platform, no spotlight." The silence that followed was deep and solemn. It was the turning point. That night, cable news picked up the trial in full force. Analysts debated the implications. Some painted it as a symptom of broader overreach, private security, filling in gaps of public trust. Others blamed it on extremism, weaponized authority, and local power gone mad. For once, no one was downplaying what had happened. We weren't just a footnote anymore. The defense scrambled. They tried to suppress the most damning footage, body cam clips from the arrest, text logs with phrases like "make an example of them," but the judge overruled. Everything was admitted. Jurors looked rattled, their notes more frantic. It became clear this was no longer about compliance violations, it was about fear, and who wielded it. On the 6th day, something strange happened. One of the jurors, a young man in his 20s, asked to be dismissed, citing safety concerns. He'd found a threatening note on his windshield after leaving court. The judge granted the dismissal, replacing him with an alternate. But the damage was done. Fear had breached the courtroom. The sheriff increased security. News vans doubled. Protesters arrived, some demanding HOA reform, others bizarrely defending. The accused waving signs that read "right to enforce an HOA overreach, no underfunded police." The circus outside became louder than the testimony within, but the jury stayed focused. Thank God they stayed focused. I testified on the 7th day. I wore a plain shirt and no makeup, wanting to look like myself, not a witness from a crime show. I described the knock, the uniform, the weapon. I told them how it felt when the man raised his gun. My voice broke, only once, when I talked about the silence after. That horrible, absolute silence. The defense tried to rattle me. Asked if I hated the HOA, if I'd ever argued with neighbors, if I exaggerated anything. I kept my answers short, factual. I didn't need to defend my fear. It had defended itself when the gun came out. One juror wiped away a tear. Another just stared wide-eyed. I knew I'd done my part. The trial wrapped on day 9. Closing arguments were a blur of passion, principle, and legal jargon. The prosecutor ended with, "Authority is not a costume, it is a responsibility." The defense countered, "Intent matters. Mistakes do not make monsters." The jury was dismissed just before lunch. My stomach churned. Waiting was worse than testifying. It took less than 5 hours. The verdict: guilty on all counts: impersonating law enforcement, armed intimidation, conspiracy, unlawful use of a firearm. The courtroom was still. No celebration, just collective relief. The accused showed no reaction, just blankness, as if even he had expected this outcome all along. Outside, the air felt cleaner. Reporters swarmed my brother, but he made a brief statement and guided me away. We didn't talk until we reached the car. Then he squeezed my hand and said, "It's over. We did what we came to do." I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure it was over, but it was something. A crack in the dam. The following week, legislation moved faster. My brothers built the Community Oversight and Protection Act, cleared the Senate with a rare bipartisan majority. It mandated transparency for private enforcement agencies, required certification, and banned armed patrols by non-governmental entities. It was a start, and a strong one. Back at the lake, things began to normalize. The Concerned Neighbors Council disbanded quietly after several members were exposed in the investigation. New community elections were held, low turnout but high relief. The new board prioritized safety, transparency, and healing. People smiled again, some even apologized. I stayed at the cabin another month, reluctant to return to my apartment. In the city, the lake had changed. Yes, but it still grounded me. I fixed the porch screen, planted herbs in Mom's old planter boxes, and finally replaced the cracked lantern by the dock. Little things, quiet things. They mattered more now. Some nights I still heard the knock, not really but in memory. A ghost's echo in the dark. I would sit up, check the cameras, whisper, "Not tonight," and sleep again. Other nights I'd light a fire, pour a glass of wine, and listen to the wind move through the trees. Grief has rhythms. I learned so does healing. I started writing about it all. Not just for records or the press, but for me. For the parts I couldn't say in court or explain to journalists. About how it felt to be powerless. About the guilt of surviving. About learning that safety is sometimes an illusion, but dignity doesn't have to be. The words helped. Eventually, publishers called. One offered a book deal, another wanted a podcast. I declined. For now, this story wasn't ready to be commodified. Not until the cracks in the community were fully mended. Not until I could walk the entire shoreline without looking over my shoulder. That day wasn't far off. I could feel it. My brother visited again before heading into campaign season. We sat at the end of the dock, feet in the water, silence between us. He asked if I forgave them being the board, the enforcer, the neighbors who believed lies. I said I didn't know, but I was trying to make room for something besides anger. He nodded, then said, "Sometimes justice is just a better future." I didn't respond, but the words stayed with me. Justice wasn't always a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it was a sunset over a lake that survived, and the people who stayed to watch it. The wind had shifted at Lakeview, both literally and figuratively. Leaves rustled differently, and the people did too. They moved with more care, spoke with less bite. There was a collective exhale, but also an unspoken agreement not to forget. Not forgetting was its own form of justice. 3 weeks after the verdict, a new issue bubbled to the surface, and obscure clause buried in the HOA bylaws. It was discovered by an interim board member who had taken it upon himself to audit everything. He called it the Echo Clause. It allowed private arbitration in cases of rule enforcement disputes. The language was vague deliberately so. The clause had been used only once before, 5 years ago, in a case where a family was forced to remove a handmade dock. They had no idea the clause existed until they lost it. It didn't make headlines back then, but now people cared. People asked how many others had been quietly silenced by this mechanism. My curiosity got the better of me. I requested access to the HOA archives and spent 2 days combing through digital and printed records. What I found disturbed me. 8 arbitration cases in the last decade, all resolved in favor of the board. No appeals, no oversight. The arbitrators were often former HOA presidents themselves. The implication was chilling. The clause had allowed a shadow system of rule enforcement to persist, invisible and unaccountable. And in several of the cases, there were records of complaints that never made it to town hall. I began drafting a report. This wasn't over, not if the roots were still rotten. I met with the new board president, a former librarian named Clara Nugent. She had warmth, clarity, and most importantly, she read the report in silence, then looked at me and said, "We need a vote." That night, she called an emergency community meeting. I helped her prepare every document. We were ready. The meeting was tense but hopeful. Residents filled the room, some with clipboards, others with folded arms. Clara presented the report first. I followed with evidence and history. When we revealed the arbitration connections, audible gasps followed. A man stood up and asked, "How could this have gone unnoticed?" The room turned inward. One by one, people approached the mic. A woman recounted being fined for painting her shutters too bright a color. Another described being told her home lowered community value and was pressured to repaint. No one had questioned it then, but now, the weight of silence felt like complicity. Shame bloomed alongside outrage. Clara called the vote should the Echo Clause be removed, and past arbitration rulings reviewed. The result was near unanimous, only 3 abstentions. The clause was repealed that night, but what came next wasn't simple. We had opened a door that led to years of quiet harm, and now came the reckoning. A task force was formed to review prior cases. Clara asked me to lead it. I hesitated, knowing it meant dredging up more pain, more buried stories. But I agreed. We met in the old community center, a circle of 5, myself, Clara, 2 volunteers from the neighborhood, and 1 lawyer from the town council. Our work began in silence. We reviewed documents by day and held interviews by evening. Some residents were hesitant, others came forward eagerly, relieved to finally be heard. The stories weren't always dramatic, but they shared a common thread: people who were made to feel small, afraid, and unheard. Not every tale had a villain, but every tale had a victim. We cataloged everything: dates, actions, resolutions. The lawyer guided us on what could be reversed and what couldn't. Some homeowners received apologies. Others received restitution from the HOA's legal insurance pool. The smallest victories meant the most: a bench restored, a mailbox replaced, a garden allowed to grow again. And slowly, Lakeview changed. You could feel it in the way people waved more, in how children played longer outside. Trust doesn't return all at once, but it does return. It starts with safety. Then comes listening. Then, eventually, forgiveness. We weren't all there yet, but we were closer than ever before. My brother flew in for the official repeal ceremony, now labeled Lakeview Restoration Day. He kept his speech short and focused on unity. "Good laws protect," he said, "but good people repair." The audience applauded. I looked around and saw even some of the original dissenters clapping. Something had shifted. Deeply later that day, Clara and I walked along the trail that circles the lake. The sun was low, casting golden reflections across the water. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked. I paused. "Enough for now," I said. "But systems like this don't fall apart all at once. We need to keep checking." She nodded. Around that time I received a letter from the man convicted in the trial. It had been screened by the authorities, then passed along. It was handwritten, brief, and surprisingly lucid. I thought I was helping, it read, but I didn't stop to ask who I was really working for. I didn't know how to feel about it. I still don't. I didn't respond. I didn't tear it up either. I kept it in a folder labeled Closure alongside court records, my testimony notes, and the first article that told the story. Closure isn't always clean. Sometimes it's just a box you can finally close, even if you don't lock it. That folder stayed on my shelf. More letters arrived in the months that followed this time from readers, viewers, strangers across the country. Some told me of their own HOA horror stories. Others thanked me for speaking out. One man sent a photo of his front yard with a note. They said my statue offended community standards. I kept it anyway. It made me laugh. I started a newsletter called The Watchpost, focused on HOA oversight and property rights. It wasn't flashy, but it grew quickly. Subscribers shared tips, local news, even legal resources. Lawyers joined. Legislators subscribed anonymously. A community formed not out of fear, but out of vigilance. Watching became its own form of peace. My brother's legislation was signed into law that fall. He sent me a photo of the signing ceremony, smiling but tired. He added a note, "This one's for the cabin." I printed it and hung it by the front door. Every time I left, I saw it, and I remembered why we fought so hard for that little, a stretch of shoreline, and for everyone else's. The seasons turned. Snow came early that year, blanketing the cabins and docks in quiet white. The lake froze over, and the children traded swimming for sledding. Even the shadows looked softer under the snow. One morning, I stepped onto the dock and just breathed. The cold air, the sharp light. Peace, not performance. Clara invited me to run for the board that winter. I declined, saying I had more impact from the outside. But I promised to attend every open meeting. Accountability isn't a position, I said. It's a habit. She smiled and said, "Then you've got the best one I've seen." It meant a lot. We'd come far. One evening I took out the old box of photos, Mom's Polaroids. Dad scribbled notes, summer snapshots with cousins. I added a new one, a photo of me and my brother on the dock, post-trial post-Kyle's just smiling at the lake. It didn't need a caption. The moment said everything. We'd earned that peace. Spring returned to Lakeview slowly, like someone afraid to interrupt the quiet. The snow melted into the earth, and buds returned to the trees. Birds sang again, and the lake shimmered without menace. But underneath the surface, something still waited. Healing is slow, especially when justice feels unfinished. Despite the reforms, despite the public closure, one name kept surfacing in whispers: Roland Tate. He had once served as HOA vice president but had vanished right before the fake cop incident. Some believed he left town. Others said he was still watching, still pulling strings. The unease clung like morning mist. Clara flagged something odd in the financial records. A payment made months before the incident marked consulting, but unusually large. The trail led to a P.O. box in another county. No name, just a paper trail that felt wrong. I joined her in digging deeper. It didn't take long to find a link. The P.O. box had been rented under a shell company, and that company, according to town records, was tied to Roland Tate. We weren't sure what it meant yet, but the connection was enough to raise alarms. Clara contacted the sheriff. I contacted my brother. We didn't want to sound paranoid, but we were done staying silent. Within days, a formal inquiry reopened. The sheriff assigned a new deputy, someone not connected to the original investigation. We handed over everything: receipts, emails, the suspicious payment trail. It didn't take long before the investigation expanded. Roland Tate, once a background figure, became the center of a new storm. An arrest warrant was issued after a search of his last known property turned up falsified ID cards, a burner phone, and HOA correspondence that had been thought deleted. The sheriff told us confidentially, this wasn't just an HOA dispute. This was a campaign, coordinated and targeted. The implications chilled us. They found Tate in a motel 3 states over, living under an alias. He didn't resist. In fact, he seemed resigned. I figured it would catch up, he said to the arresting officer. Didn't think it'd take this long. He was extradited quietly. No cameras, no press, just accountability, creeping in like dusk. When the news broke, the town reacted with a mix of vindication and exhaustion. People were tired of surprises, tired of scandal, but some said it felt like closing a chapter that never should have opened. Clara and I attended the hearing. Tate pled not guilty, but the evidence spoke louder than he ever could. The prosecution painted a picture of manipulation, Tate using HOA power for personal gain, targeting dissenters and orchestrating fear. The fake cop hired through a back channel he helped fund. The echo clause, strengthened during his tenure. The entire playbook had his fingerprints. My stomach turned with every exhibit shown. But something unexpected happened during cross-examination. Tate's lawyer revealed that others had known others who hadn't been charged. Names we recognized. Former board members, a local contractor, even a lawyer tied to the arbitration scheme. The room gasped. The conspiracy ran deeper than we'd feared. New subpoenas were issued. The case cracked wider. And suddenly, the story wasn't just Lakeview's, it was regional. Reporters returned. My inbox overflowed. I declined interviews, but agreed to one local podcast. I wanted the truth told without spectacle. No fire, just facts. People deserved that much. My brother testified again, this time with more fire than before. This wasn't petty politics, he said. It was systemic intimidation under the guise of governance. His words echoed through the courtroom. Tate stared blankly ahead, unmoved, but some jurors looked shaken. So did a few spectators. The truth carried weight. When the verdict came, it felt surreal. Guilty on 5 counts, including conspiracy and reckless endangerment. Tate didn't flinch. He just nodded, as if acknowledging something long accepted. Clara squeezed my hand. We both exhaled. A final piece had fallen, but the puzzle it completed wasn't one we ever wanted to build. The sentencing came with a caveat. Tate agreed to turn over all records, including encrypted emails and board communications. What followed was a month of revelations. The documents showed a level of orchestration we hadn't imagined, mapping dissenters, targeting families for code violations, even discussions of surveillance. It read like fiction, but it was all real. We hosted a final town forum to address the findings. Not everyone came, but those who did shared tears, stories, apologies. A woman who once denied the harassment stood and said, "I believed the wrong people, and I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. I believed her. We all did. The past no longer needed silence. I wrote the final Watch Post newsletter that week. I titled it Truths at the Dock. It included a full timeline, a list of protections past, and resources for communities across the country. Your neighborhood, I wrote, should never be your battleground. I hit publish, closed the laptop, and walked outside. The lake shimmered with spring sunlight. Ducks skimmed the surface. Children played on paddleboards. I stood at the dock where everything began. It looked unchanged, but I wasn't. None of us were. We were bruised but stronger. And finally, the quiet didn't feel ominous. It felt earned. A few weeks later, I received a package. No return address, just a padded envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a note for your records. Some truths deserve light. The drive contained recordings, Tate's meetings, call logs, emails never filed. I turned them over to the authorities. Then I went for a walk. I've learned that stories don't really end. They shift shape. They echo what happened here. Will ripple for years. But we did something rare. We stood up, we faced it, and we changed the rules. That matters. That lasts longer than outrage. It lays a foundation others can build on. As for the cabin, it's still ours, still quiet, still anchored to memory. Some weekends I sit on the porch with tea and just listen, not for danger, just for birds and wind and the hum of life moving on. I don't guard it like I used to. I welcome it. We survived, we restored, we remembered.